And those are the folks that make the best organizers.
Mm-hmm.
Is the ones that aren't, or the most effective organizers. They're not the ones that are, as deeply entrenched in like left-wing philosophy. It's the people that have community connections and
Mm-hmm.
real affinities for their brothers and sisters on the job, and for their patients if they're a nurse, for their students if they're a teacher, for their students' parents if
Mm-hmm.
they're a teacher. Those are the folks that make the best and most effective organizers. It's not the people that can recite Marx chapter and
Mm-hmm.
verse if
That
they're
is right.
educated in how to organize.
Though I certainly welcome all teachers willing to cite Marx
Right.
chapter and verse. Please email us promptly if you were that person.
That was, one of the things I mentioned when that whole force the vote controversy happened, and people were like, some people were getting kind of heated about it, and I just said, no one that I talk to that I'm organizing asks me where I stand on force the vote.
Yeah.
They ask me like, how can we get these class sizes down, or like right now, how can we get PPE? So I just take all that stuff with a grain of salt. Like, and I've organized conservative people, and gotten them involved in the union, which sometimes I don't want to say backfires, but it always creates more challenges. Like, we're a pretty social justice union at CTU, and we support Black Lives Matter pretty unequivocally. But then we have literal members that are married to cops, and they make up in the last union election, 35% of people voted for their group, which is made up of more conservative elements, people that want us just to focus on bread and butter issues. And so, like, we have that voice in our House of Delegates because, a lot of these people have terrible politics, but they'll be good union people, and the people in their schools respect them because of that. So they get elected to be building reps. But yeah, that's always an internal struggle we have whenever we try to take our advocacy beyond bread and butter.
Right.
Oh, I definitely can relate to that. And of course, doing this in Alabama, we don't have much of a choice.
Yeah.
If we have any kind of purity test on who's going to be allowed, quote unquote, to be active, well, hell, it's just going to be a few of us. But that was always an inspiring moment to see, when you had white, older Trump voters with, young Latina teachers and black teachers and you had the north side of town, the south side of town, that kind of thing, and everybody pulling in the same direction, even if it is fleeting, and maybe it is for something fairly narrow. But man, that is so empowering.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kenzo, I just kind of jumped right in because that's how easy it is for me to start talking about public education issues. But what do you want to talk about? Shit.
Let's see. Like, we could talk about public education. So we're in this strange crisis now in Chicago where we've lost all of our leaders. Not leaders, but we lost all of our top bureaucrats very quickly. And it was
You
right
guys have
after
been cycling through like superintendents or
yeah.
CEOs, I guess y'all call them.
And that's important. The reason why they're called CEOs is that in '95 a law was amended, the school code, that changed the designation from superintendent to CEO, so they could hire people who are non-educators without the proper superintendent credential. And the
and
first
I'm
person,
sure that's worked out great, right?
yeah, it's been terrible. But also our last CEO was an educator, and she was also terrible because we don't have an elected school board, so everyone works completely at the behest of the mayor. So she, even though she had time in the classroom, she had that climber PMC bureaucrat kind of spirit, and she
We all
was
know those
vicious.
who make it to central office.
Now she's got some sort of like fancy NGO job, like, you know, some org with the words children and first and united.
That also makes sense.
So she's making a ton of money doing probably a tenth of the work that she had to do as CEO. Cashing out young. I think she's like early 40s.
Yeah, I've seen that type.
One of ours is still in prison, Barbara Bird Bennett, because she was very fast and loose with the deals that she was making with ed companies and a literal like creepy abuser guy that was selling college prep materials. Like she, you know, most people I think have some self-preservation and they realize who you can and who you can't work with. And I don't think Barbara Bird Bennett had that. So she's in prison now.
She was reckless.
Yes. Yeah, they're all feckless, but she was feckless and reckless.
Yeah, there's crooked, and then there's like just in your face crooked.
Yeah. And the funny
we
thing
had
too,
a crook that is now running for Congress in the 5th district. Place the nut job Mo Brooks. He did a similar, you know, ran out of town with 24 hours notice, got some cushy private sector consulting job.
Mm-hmm.
Then Trump appointed him up in, he was like undersecretary of the Army, Casey Rudensky, and he has returned. He's like an STD that just pops up every few years. You know, soap won't wash it off. And this dude's he's back to revisit us and run for Congress. But anyway, I hate to cut you off there. You were talking about the leaders and kind of the top figures that you're losing and cycling through in Chicago.
Oh yeah, so they all left, and then we have, not to be too confusing, but we have 2 CEOs because we also have a chief education officer. And that person also was an educator. But like I was on the bargaining team this year, and I had to sit across the table from Latanya McDade, who is the chief ed officer, and like she ideologically did not believe that teachers should have like voice in anything. Like I mean, a lot of those people, they have that mentality that you teach, and then if you're one of the smart ones, you get a central office job. And then you should be allowed to make all the decisions because you proved yourself to be one of the best teachers.
You're one of the good ones.
And of course, that all that just means is like the Peter principle works: is whoever kisses the right ass, whoever throws the right people under the bus, they work their way up, and then they make decisions for the rest of us. And then with them, they work their way up so high that they had Latanya McDade she's going to be a super somewhere else in a smaller district. She also failed up, and this was after a very intense strike. That fortunately for us, I feel like the union and teachers in general came out ahead on that with the public. Like our public perception was pretty popular, but I think the fight during the pandemic did hurt us because people were kind of all over the map in general about how they felt about in-person versus virtual school. And the mayor did a job of going on national media where no one questions her and talked about how much she loves the kids and how the teachers just aren't right on this. And that's another interesting thing too, is because the local press ask her questions. She doesn't talk to them anymore, but she will talk to national press because it's all softballs and they're all connected through the DNC. So they all love her.
Yeah, I noticed that, throughout your pandemic struggles, I noticed that about the mayor. And I'm not surprised. It definitely makes sense, but I could definitely see where that's a little bit of a barrier. And I agree with you. It has been such a scattershot response from the public and even among educators, so split on how we should have handled things. And I think that was throwing a wrench in everybody's
Yeah.
plans in so many ways, including our unions and just, the general public education movement.
I think also with our with the public here, I think everyone just wanted someone to say, this is the plan, and we're going to stick to this plan throughout it. And, the union were one of the few orgs that were like fighting for a just reopening plan, a safe reopening plan. And because, the mayor is the mayor and she has the platforms that she has, it just looked like we wanted to fight her. And she did a really good job of making this seem very personal. The fact that we were pissed about the strike and we're taking this out on her. And
therefore taking it out on the kids.
Yeah. And she did this really revealing interview with the New York Times where she said something like, I think the union is trying to do politics, is not just trying to defend their teachers, but trying to do politics in the city. And it's like, have you read one article about CORE?
Yeah.
We laid it out 10 years ago. That's exactly what we want to do.
Politics is the name of the game. Everything involving education involves public dollars, therefore political dollars. So I hate that line about, we got to get politics out of education.
Yeah.
Fuck that, because that's not a reality. Maybe there's a one-sided disarming, like one side up, but there is no non-political public education, period. Yeah, but I saw that framing from your mayor and from a lot of others all over the country. But I was really impressed with what you guys were doing, and I saw some good work out of LA and some other places. And from my perspective, it wasn't so much about when to open and all that. My number one issue was have the educators actually, shaping these plans. And then, like you said, be fucking consistent. Pick something and stick with it. I had that conversation with, superintendent and central office staff of, you know what, even if you pick a bad plan, at least just fucking roll with it. That's probably better than 3 or 4 bad plans in a month's time.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. We have brand new initiatives every school year. And sometimes, they're
don't you
good.
Love that?
The most frustrating is when they're good, and then the next year they're like, well, the data didn't look good. It's like, no, the data was probably fine. You just got a new buddy that you needed to hook up with a consultancy gig. It's always that. It's really gross. Like, we had a program here that was really big in the 2000s called AVID. And have you heard of AVID?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had AVID.
There's positives and negatives to the program. I think what it was it was a good program that a teacher developed, and some edupreneurs said, okay, we're going to have to stamp trademarks all over this and make it really expensive for the school systems. And at a time when the CPS, Chicago Public Schools, was not spending money on anything, they were spending money hand over fist in the AVID program. This has to be mid 2000s or so. And as it turns out, the person who was a very passionate advocate for it and wanted to head the department played basketball with Arnie Duncan.
How convenient.
Arnie Duncan and Barack Obama. This was a high, you had to be tall at that point to make it into that greasy neoliberal machine.
Yeah.
Because, Obama didn't play golf. He played basketball.
Well,
he probably played some golf, too.
I think that's such a common occurrence that you see in education, whether it's, the most urban districts like you guys or some of the most country places down here. Everybody's looking for a contract. Everybody's looking for a way to commodify something inside those schools and get their private hands on some public dollars. And you're so right. That's God, I mean, so many teachers could tell you, so anyone listening, if you're not a teacher, you don't know any teachers, have a conversation with them, and they're going to tell you about how they have to start from scratch nearly every fucking year with some new set of standards, curriculum, programs, initiatives. And like you said, half the time when you actually find a good one, that's the one they scrap the quickest, because there's probably not enough money in it, or it's just too good. It's too decent and like of the right spirit, and so the fucking evil ones, the bureaucrats, want to scrap it. So you probably realize why Jacob left me on this late shift with you, because I can just, even at 2 a.m, rant about this shit.
One other thing, though, that I have to mention, that our Mayor Lori Lightfoot did, and why it's very careful to talk about this issue. You have to be very careful to talk about this issue, I should say, is she has a new initiative because the media in this town hate her. She will not answer their questions. Like, she has done weird gaslighting things to Marianne Ahern, who is like one of the most respected local political journalists. And it just makes every press conference a big nightmare. She gets very petty and creepy. So she's led this new initiative now where she's saying that she's going to give one-on-one interviews to only black and brown reporters going forward.
I don't know if I've ever heard an elected official do that.
She's the first. And so,
or say it publicly, at least.
Right-wing media now is just like having a field day with it. Tulsi Gabbard tweeted about it, about how this is anti-white racism. And that's not the problem. The problem with this is she's using this woke-sounding policy, and I know what she's going to do with this. She's only going to grant these interviews to black and brown reporters who she has a good relationship with.
Right.
This isn't about her enfranchising anyone. It's about her having some sort of way of scoring political capital out of avoiding people that are going to ask her tough questions.
Right. She can maintain favorable coverage, and if you're against it, you're probably a bigot.
Yes, exactly. But then you have like these intellectual dark web people and Tulsi now all over the Twitters saying how this is just racist against whites.
God, yeah, I can imagine this is going to be a thorny one for a while. And it's going to keep those weirdos on Twitter fired up for a while.
Yeah,
and
this
makes it harder for you guys in the union, or really anyone, your community allies, to holler on her shit.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's some fairly well-meaning liberals in town who are now going to be a little bit defensive of her, because, I mean, you don't want to see her get beat up by all these fucking weirdo racists on the internet. Yeah, I really think that's a despicable move, truly.
And like the ironic thing is, like, when she does this kind of all these kind of stunts, all of her top communication staffers are white. These plans are being hatched by white people.
That also makes sense.
The
guy I was telling you about, Casey Rudensky, he kind of has similar antics with the press. Like, there was a incident where he, like, took a manila folder and like shoved it up against the camera. Just all sorts of rude and dismissive antics of the press. And they were actually paying a political consultant, someone who had ran school board member campaigns, people who were on the board. They were paying this guy to do PR work and, allegedly like print up T-shirts and you name it. But he was kind of like I'm trying to think, like the Paul Begala, those type of like, hatchet men that they, Rahm Emanuel to some degree, I guess, has kind of played that role. They're hiring one of these guys, but like the JV squad version. Not an impressive one, but a fucking expensive one. So you have 6-figure salary people with PR, the official PR director, an official, comms director, while also cutting these contract checks to a political consultant. All because you don't know how to be fucking honest with the public. That's a lot cheaper.
Yeah, every time I tell stories about political corruption people are like, oh yeah, that's Chicago. I'm like, no, it's everywhere. It's just in
It's
Chicago,
everywhere.
people are a little more upfront and naked about it. That's
Hmm.
changing a bit now. It used to be people would be very upfront about like, yeah, I don't want to talk to anyone unless I know who your the word was rabbi back then. They would for political patron. I don't know. I was actually talking to my rabbi the other day, and we are trying to figure out what the etymology was of that, and we couldn't. But
I
yeah, that
swear, I
was
never heard that.
people would just be very open about that. Like, oh yeah, I don't want to talk to you unless I know your rabbi, and that meant like your political patron. If your political patron was someone like Richard Daley, people would answer your calls. If it's an alderman, maybe lesser likely, but that was how clout really worked at the time. But yeah, like when I worked as a staffer for the Illinois Federation of Teachers, I traveled all over the state and helped out different locals with their comms, especially when they were in crisis. And you see, there's a political machine everywhere.
Yeah, it's just, yeah, how in your face is it? Who are the players? Sometimes down here in rural areas, it literally is the pastor. He is the political patron, because in some counties, those are some of the most powerful figures. But you're right. Chicago obviously has a historic reputation, and it's, I'm sure, very well earned.
Have you ever heard of a guy named Bob Romanek?
No, tell me about Bob.
So, are you familiar with East St. Louis?
Yeah, a little bit.
It's probably the poorest city in our state. Only 3 districts have a non-elected school board because the state was like, we just don't trust you to elect your own people.
One of those state intervention type
Yeah,
things.
so Chicago, well, that was just written into our school code. North Chicago and East St. Louis. And East St. Louis is in Illinois. Literally, it's east of St. Louis. It used to be like almost a long time ago, like a twin city to St. Louis. And it was a thriving town that just fell into despair. And this guy, Bob Romanek, owns all of the strip clubs in East St. Louis and just about there. So he's like a strip club mogul in that area. And so, of course, he's very wealthy. And that money and his fame, he spun into a right-wing podcast, like a really vile right-wing podcast that he puts out. So he's very well known down there, and he was able to buy up a lot of ads and billboards and ad space, running for state rep. And thank God every progressive anything in that region came together to form a coalition to make sure that didn't happen. But the guy definitely has the money, and he's like a little, he's the patron down there.
What a fucking creep.
Yeah.
And how sketchy are, like school board members who are connected with a guy like that? I mean, even if they're not elected, I'm assuming they're appointed by the council or the mayor.
Yeah, I believe by the mayor.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of those fights that also, spans the country, is the fight over elected school boards. It's something that, thus far we've successfully fought off in Huntsville, but it's definitely a big trend across the state. It's something that's threatened. Back in 2016, there were 2 open board seats in Huntsville, and we flipped both of them. Both of the grassroots former educators won against the machine, and that's immediately when you started hearing that talk. Because now you can't trust the school board anymore. There's too many wild cards, too many questions being asked, and you saw that from like the prominent business class and those types, that we need to depoliticize it. So those candidates were elected on the back of a movement, and that's what scared them. And that's suddenly when you need to take the vote away.
Yeah, one thing that I think scares the shit out of our mayors. So 10% of our city council now are all DSA members, and like they've formed a DSA caucus, which is phenomenal because there's already a progressive caucus, which is bigger, and they're all members of that progressive caucus in city council. So it's like having, I don't know, like a central committee.
Yeah,
you know,
that's so cool.
and they
Also,
vote in unison, and they put out statements in unison.
that is really awesome, and also it helps me appreciate the scale of just how fucking big Chicago is. That you have a city council big enough to have caucuses.
Well, part of that is corruption too. Like, we don't need to have 50 wards with 50 aldermen. The city used to have 100 aldermen. They used to have 2 per ward, and that got eliminated because that was just way too expensive just to pay all those people.
Right.
But yeah, so we have 5 out of 50, and then they play well with the libs as well. The ones that truly are like my. People have asked me before to run for alderman, and my answer to that is I don't want to, because I have a very good alderman. He's not a member of DSA. He's not a leftist, but he's a progressive with a lot of integrity. So if you come to his office and make a good argument for something, even if it doesn't help him out politically, he'll listen and he'll help you out. And he works pretty much in lockstep with the socialist aldermen too. In fact, we had 6 socialist aldermen at one point, and we kicked one of them out. Well, he was censured by the chapter because he voted on an austerity budget when the rest of the caucus said no, we're all going to vote no on this austerity budget. And he thought he can curry some favor with the mayor by being the one socialist that would be on her side. And then there was immediately a meeting in our chapter's executive committee, and he was censured, and he's no longer considered part of our socialist caucus.
Yeah, I don't claim him anymore.
Yeah, he was a backpack rapper who found his way in politics through Bernie. And yeah, he did not have the integrity we thought.
Internet stereotype come true.
But I mean,
bad Mad TV sketch.
He's like 40, so like he was a pretty big rapper like in the early 2000s. So he's not like a TikTok or a SoundCloud rapper or anything like that. He's not Lil Xan.
I don't know that this makes it any better.
That would make it a little more excusable, maybe, if you know.
Right. This is not a youthful indiscretion.
That was actually one of the ways they were trying to attack him, because he ran against an entrenched old machine alderman who needed to leave office, and he was able to force him into a runoff. And then during the runoff, when it looked like Andre was going to win, beat the incumbent, all of his old battle raps came to surface. And, you know, in early 2000s, he was a young man, and he used some homophobic slurs, some racist slurs, misogynist slurs in attempts of winning rap battles. And it didn't take him or anything, but that was an interesting wrinkle to the story, at least.
That's interesting, because we kind of had a school board race in 18 that reminds me of that a little bit. Yeah, an entrenched machine candidate who never should have been on the board in the first place. And by this time, his health was bad. The dude slept through all the meetings. You know, he wasn't all there. He actually just now stepped down in the past month.
Mm-hmm.
So, spoiler alert, the machine won.
Yeah.
But it was a very young guy who was running against him. He wasn't an educator, but he was very sincere. He was not a leftist, but he was, you know, progressive minded. I felt had integrity, like you're describing with the other one. You know, somebody who would listen and hear us out. And at the 11th hour, the machine put out these nasty flyers all over the neighborhood with his mugshot. It turns out he'd been arrested for pot when he was in college. You know, just like frat boy shenanigans kind of thing is what it seemed like. And they put this shit in every mailbox in his zip code.
Yeah.
I mean, just really disgusting. Because up to that point, it had been a super clean, low-key campaign. Hardly anyone voted in this. Like, there may have been 10% turnout, if that. It was off year, off month, like August election. And to do that really was, it was a low blow.
Yeah.
And, you know, but that's how these machines operate. I mean, they're not operating in the same moral framework we are,
Mm-hmm.
and that's something I had to learn very early on. I was a youngster getting into all this, that a lot of people really are fucked up, and they do not care about other people.
No, that is
They
so
care about
true.
they care about themselves. They care about making money, you know. And if they have to step on people to make that happen, then so be it.
Yeah, I was in a so I was a staffer for a while, so I on social media at least became friends with a lot of the other staffers, even ones that didn't really share my politics. You work on campaigns together, you get along. And I was recently quoted in the New York Times because AFT President Randy Weingarten put out this statement that she wants all schools opened 5 days a week, full classes in the fall. And Dana Goldstein, who wrote the article, I have a relationship with her. I've known her since she was a blogger. So she reached for me for comment because she knew about my situation. My wife has stage 4 cancer, and so I can't do in-person teaching right now because I'm her primary caretaker and also my son's.
Right.
And we can't really have help right now because my son's too young to be vaccinated, and my wife is still immunocompromised. So like if we're close to people indoors, she still wears a mask, for example. We all do, for her sake. And so I was quoted as basically saying this was, Randy Weingarten is doing public relations right now. She's not advocating for her members. And that got in the New York Times, little, humble brag. But anyway, the staffer who apparently that I knew who was working on the other side of this story, which I posted on my Facebook, said something like, "Oh, I take that as a compliment that you call this public relations." And I just responded to him. I'm like, "Dude, this is not a game to me. So like, back off." And then he's like, this is all he's like, you have no idea what I'm going through either. I'm like, I put down, "Stop harassing me," was the next comment, because he's a staffer of my union. And if he were to say anything beyond that, I have no reason not to report him.
Yeah, I think that's something that you touched on, though. It's not a game.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that I learned pretty quickly, that when you actually believe in this shit, a lot of people don't know how to take that. Mm-hmm. Because so many of the folks involved, both in education and in politics, and I say education not at the rank and file level, but in the bureaucracy leadership level, so many of those folks are, in it for self-interest or these other agendas. And so if you are sincere and you have a heart for kids and like you just are passionate to do the right thing, well, you're a fucking weirdo. In those circles.
Yeah, and like if you're looking for a bureaucratic job to help out teachers unions, like those staff positions are really few and far between, and they're hard to get if you don't know anyone. So I could see for some people it is tempting to try to climb your way through the bureaucracy and think you're going to do change there, but that doesn't happen. They either change you or they fire you.
Yeah. We'll talk soon. I have some stories on that too. That'll be for but I've seen that a lot with teachers who decide to enter in administration, and it's always, well, not always, but the good ones, that's their story is, hey, I just, I want to change things. I think I can do it better. Mm-hmm. And, I respect that in the moment. And for a lot of these people, I feel like, well, yeah, you probably could do better. But you're so right. Once you leave and you enter the dark side of management, you're probably not coming back.
Yeah.
Unless they kick you out, in which case you probably still had a heart. And welcome back. But it sucks. It sucks to grind people up like that, and I'm sure you've seen plenty over the years too of people who were good educators who meant well, and they just for various reasons, because they thought they could make a difference, or they need the money, they allow themselves to go in that machine and get ground up.
when I first started teaching in 2003, there was a style of principal in the Chicago public schools where if a parent came in to complain about you, they would stick up for you, and then as soon as the parent left the room, they would yell at you and just say, don't ever let that happen again. Like, they were always sticking up for their staff, and they were always career educators who, like, the last 10 years or so their career were principals, and a lot of them taught at the school where they became the principal. That used to just be the style there. And
it makes such a big difference.
Slowly, everything
you just described,
they all like retired almost en masse within a few years. And I think when they saw the changes in the system through the bureaucracy, they're like, I don't want to be a principal under all this.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we do have a lot of young principals who are there to make waves. And a lot of them are really bad on labor, really bad with respecting the contract, because they were not taught in ed school, in their leadership programs, to respect the contract.
Well, and that's something that, well, I know with you guys and how hard you work inside CTU, but even outside, even in weaker locals, even a half-ass steward or building rep probably knows more about the law or the contract than a lot of these administrators, like you're talking about, these careerists who are coming in. They're just passing through to the next contract. They love to send those to Title I schools and add their resume for a couple years.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've said this already several times, but it is amazing how many of these things really mirror each other in school districts all over, which is just a reiteration of how much our struggles are really connected.
Did you ever read Dr. Lois Weiner's book, The Future of Our Schools, or any of her stuff?
Yeah, it's been a while since whenever it came out, but yeah, I really like her stuff.
She just did my show on Sunday last week.
Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out.
Yeah, I'll send you the link. She puts it very well. She says that all of this privatization and neoliberalization of school, she calls it a plan. And she says, because sometimes when you get in the weeds about that stuff, people think you're a conspiracy theorist. They say you're like Charlie Day in that meme, like connecting Pepe Sylvia to the mail.
I've never done that.
So, but she puts it very simply, like, this is a plan. And the plan is to privatize schools, to make them run off, fewer tax dollars, and whatever tax dollars they do get go into the pockets of private interests, and this benefits them. And I think that's the way I always frame it to people. Like, it is a plan, and like the fact that I had such a privilege in IFT working in big city locals and small town locals, I got to see it play out. And one of the big shifts that's been happening in the smaller locals is they're used to having a good deal where, like, the union president and the superintendent maybe go to the same church. Maybe they even golf together, and they'll shake their hands to make sure that the teachers get a decent deal. Not always, but like, that's just something that a lot of union presidents were used to, having that relationship. Those superintendents are all retiring now and being replaced by these like broad school neoliberal types, like young climbers.
Yeah.
And the union presidents don't know how to deal with it because they've never had to like get into a fight where like they not only do they have to fight at the table, but then the other side is like hiring public relations firms and labor lawyers that specialize in communications. So like the cards are really stacked against a lot of them in ways that it's not in cities where people are used to fighting this stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that too, even at a smaller level here. That is definitely happening because there was that community tie that oftentimes, like you said, it didn't necessarily mean there was great deals, but when they do go to church together, when everybody knows everybody, and you went to school with their mama and them, that makes a difference. Sometimes, at least.
Yeah.
And even when it's not making much of a material difference, it may make a difference in the way these fights play out. And I've seen that for sure. And I think that's, it's definitely is an organizing opportunity, but at the same time, it is going to be a learning experience for folks who haven't had to go through that. You mentioned Broad, my guy, Wardensky, I was talking about, a Broad Academy graduate.
Of course.
By the way.
Yeah, those of you in the chat that don't know what the Broad Fellows are, Eli Broad is this multi-billionaire who is like a Bill Gates type. Like, he wants to privatize everything, have canned curricula, just deprofessionalize the profession so we can have more like electronic virtual learning. And he runs an academy for people who want to be superintendents. And, he gets them connected to the right political people, which are all privatizers. He's close to like the Cory Booker type politicians as well. And that they have an agenda there. And those are the people like I was talking about, like these hotshot superintendents who come in to climbers just to fuck up the system. These people have names and addresses.
They recruit typically out of private industry. They want I guess they would probably say executive types, but in practice it's probably middle management as much as anything. They go for military types. My guy was a colonel in the Army and had developed the America's Army video game. How's that for a throwback? I don't know if you remember that one.
This sounds vaguely familiar.
It was back during the height of the Iraq War, and the Army developed its own like Call of Duty knockoff, basically. And we're sending it in the mail to teenage boys all over the country. That was his brainchild, so you can already get a sense of like his mentality entering into education, and those are just the type of fuckers that Broad Academy pushed out. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't Eli Broad just die recently?
I think so. Yeah.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, the Earth got a little nicer.
Yeah. Not crying any tears for that dude, but unfortunately, he's still got a few of his cronies out there.
Yeah, he doesn't even need to exist. He has now, he has an estate to fund these projects. He was just rotting flesh in a suit.
Replicated. I remember a blog piece from years ago talking about the Broad virus. I don't know if you ever remember stumbling on that one.
No.
I think it was a blog out of Seattle, maybe. So this would have been like late 2000s. And I remember that started to make the rounds after this guy showed up in Huntsville, because a lot like the smaller locals you're describing in Illinois, folks weren't used to this kind of figure. It was usually a career educator who either worked their way up the ranks in administration, or maybe had been a superintendent in a smaller system and moved up to a bigger one. So, these types of folks are like special forces of privatization. They have a different skill set, a different network, and a clear agenda. And any school system that ends up with one of these people, if you're not prepared, you'll look around and it'll be a totally different school system within a couple years.
Has Paul Vallis ever poked his nose around your parts?
That name rings a bell for some reason.
So, Bad Praxis, thanks so much for the raid. We got some more folks now in the chat. Hell, baby, thanks so much. Good to see ya. So Paul Vallis, he got to kind of take it back a little bit from what I was talking about in '95 when they amended the school code to allow for CEOs in lieu of superintendents. Paul Vallis was specifically on Daley's mind as the person he wanted to run. In fact, that's why they made that change in the school code. It's because Daley loved this guy Vallis, who was he was a Republican, but he was a Republican that was like, how do I put it? Kind of a John McCain type, like a so-called maverick because he worked with Democrats on things, but he was just a huckster, just a grifter. and he got rid of any decent program in the school system in Chicago. So like we used to have a good education to career program that kept a lot of kids in school who did not want to go to college but wanted to pursue culinary arts or aviation, computer science. And Paul Vallis, to cut it out of the budget, said, well, you know what? This is racist. Why are we putting black and brown children in these trade programs? And then he just got rid of the trade programs, so no kids got them. And he believed in charter schools. That was the first big push of charter schools. He really remade the system into a neoliberal nightmare. And then what happened was he left, basically like a lot of our supers do, before the negative impacts of their policies come to fruition.
They always skip town before the worst of it hits the fan.
And that's why we're losing our CEO now. And then he went, I think, next to Hartford, Connecticut. No, he went New Orleans. He was the big profiteer behind the privatization of New Orleans schools after Katrina.
Oh, okay.
That's where he made a shit ton of money. Yeah.
Wow, he sounds like a giant piece of shit.
He's a giant piece of shit.
The name rings a bell.
Hartford comes to mind because that was the only city that was smart enough to just kick his ass out. Like they
good on them.
They did the research, and he was trying to get a law passed to, again, like, you know, here to get so he could run their school systems, and they immediately called him out on it. And he actually, like, you know, like the guy getting kicked out of a party and yelling drunk over his shoulder, he like issued a bunch of statements about how Hartford does not care about its children.
Oh yeah. Real graceful exit. You know, that really sounds familiar. They skip in town before the worst of it hits. And I think that's one of the major reasons why so many of these leaders, quote unquote, cycle in and out so quickly. I forget the stats, but like the average length of a superintendent's term is pretty short. It's not much better than the teacher turnover rate, actually, which I think is pretty damning because in my estimation, it's either those who maybe are somewhat well-intentioned and just realize the limitations, but it's a lot of those crooks who, they come in, wreak havoc, and then move on to the next town before everybody realizes what happened.
And then like Barbara Bird Bennett, the one that I told you is in prison now, that was her thing. So this was a thing we made a lot of hay out of because she was still registered to vote in Ohio while she was running the Chicago public schools, because a reporter asked her something about one of the local elections, and then she just blurted out like, I'm not registered to vote in Chicago. She'd been here for a few years at that point too. Oh, and she was also like, it's disaster, you know, like the Naomi Klein book, it's disaster capitalism. You know, Paul Vallis definitely profited off of Katrina. And then Barbara Bird Bennett made a shit ton of money in Detroit when their schools. Are you familiar with what happened to like the public services in Detroit a few years ago?
My understanding is that there was like a state appointed like manager that was more or less installed to bypass all elected city government. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, it was the neoliberal wet dream is what they got to do. They got to declare a financial emergency and then appoint, you know, big brain PMC types to fulfill the roles that should have been fulfilled by like elected officials or like the departments of elected officials. So there's no accountability. And basically everything got privatized. Their pensions got screwed. So people who had existing pensions got screwed out of a ton of their money. And that's rat shit. That I have no respect for anyone who fucks with someone's promised, you know, retirement income. But Barbara Bird Bennett was one of the profiteers and engineers of that program. She was a consultant. I don't think she ever had a real role in DPS, but I think that was her last stop before Chicago.
Yeah, it's amazing how doing your homework as educators, when you actually do your homework on some of these jokers that show up in your school district. I mean, and same goes for those of you who are parents or just community members, because believe me, it does impact everyone in the community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the profiteering. One of the big trends that I know I've seen, and curious how much it's taking place up your neck of the woods, is the outsourcing or privatizing of support staff. You know, custodians, security guards, cafeteria workers, receptionists in the office, your parapros in special education. We've seen a lot of outsourcing of those positions. You know, what used to be a school district employee with a pension, decent health care, you know, some due process rights. Those are now filled by temp agencies. You know, with CEOs who just so happen to be prominent contributors to political campaigns.
Yeah,
is there
that's
much
right.
of that going on up there?
Oh yeah, so much of that.
I mean, they're the most vulnerable people in terms of the staff of these schools, and so of course they're going to be the first targets.
So in our last contract fight, the one we struck in 2019 over, we insisted upon a clause to stop the increased privatization of those services. Particularly what we were really worried about is in the area of clinicians, because as it is, any of the professional organizations that guide the practices of like school counselors and social workers, we are way out of any kind of rational ratios. So like, for example, we fought and won one teacher, one social worker, one nurse in every school in this last contract. But even by those standards, by the social worker association, that's one social worker for every 500 kids. And they say that's about 100 times it's about 100 times what it should be. And that's us, you know, fighting for, you know, this monumental leap, because before it was, you would share all of these clinicians with 2 or 3 other schools, and they would, like, you know, this is ridiculous. A nurse wouldn't be at a school every day. A nurse might be at your school Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then so like one of the side effects of that is the state legislature passed this bullshit bill that allowed non-nurses to administer EpiPens to students, EpiPens, and I believe like inhalers and things like that, like handling students with certain needs like that, which allowed for the school districts to not hire any more nurses or even let go of nurses. That was a huge blow to us because, you know, the principals, they have to run a school based upon what the district's resources are going to give them. And, you know, if we get a nurse twice a week, he or she is going to have to put some pressure on another staffer, particularly one of the more vulnerable ones, like support staff, to do that kind of work. And a lot of people are not comfortable with administering EpiPens, and now that's part of their job.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that something very similar just happened in Alabama, and I remember the talk being like, oh, well, they can't, you know, that's not requiring teachers or counselors or whoever to do that. But like you just said, that's fine in theory until you get into the school and the principal doesn't have that staff member. Somebody's got to fucking do it. It's probably not going to be the principal.
Yeah. One of the sick things too is that, so, you know, when we negotiated that meant that, you know, that's the floor. Like, we want to have one nurse in every school, but if the school district prioritized, you know, what the students needed, they could find more, but they're doing the absolute bare minimum. One of the things that they negotiated was a phase in. So we're still short-staffed of nurses, and this was all before the pandemic. And we laid out essentially, not to say we foresaw the pandemic, that would be ridiculous, but we foresaw, we assessed the system and these buildings as being unsafe. And we asked for a lot in our contract to make these buildings safe, and the board rejected all of them. Had they implemented all those things, including increased support staff, we would have been far better prepared to deal with the pandemic. And like, you know, how are we supposed to deal with in-person school or hybrid learning or whatever they're calling it with a nurse 2 days a week and kids catching COVID in the classroom?
Right.
Like, you know, we didn't, you know, we laid out like, this is what the students need. And lo and behold, a year later, if we had all these things, it could save lives.
Yeah, isn't that amazing when you actually look at the work from the perspective of the people doing the work, who actually give a shit about the outcome of the work? You can save lives, you can save money, and you can have better outcomes if that's what it's about.
And this is why the mayor is so pissed that we're trying to be political players in the city, because she doesn't want reasonable policies, because reasonable policies are expensive.
And that forces an exposure of who they really are. Which, yeah, I think that's great that you guys were able to at least, get some language in there about the privatization, because that trend is taking off everywhere as far as I can tell. But we've definitely seen it grow just in the past decade here in Alabama. You know, a company that used to be this guy in his dorm room in college in Huntsville is now a multi-state operation fielding custodians, cafeteria workers, security guards, special education parapros, and is expanding into other industries too. And the special education part was always one of the most troubling pieces, because you have these districts are doing the bare minimum to meet IEPs as it is in too many cases, and putting pressure on the teachers of record to, twist the IEP or write it in such a way that it, costs for the least amount of resources.
Oh, chat.
And
so
then
IEPs, in case you don't know, those are individualized education plans, and those are for students with special needs. And it's, it's a legal document that's agreed upon by typically the guardians and the school and staff, that certain accommodations have to be made for the student for them to get an equitable education.
Thank you, Kenzo, for catching my acronym insider jargon there.
No worries.
And that's a great point, that it is a legal document. And sometimes you have these districts that decide, you know what, to hell with it. We're just going to see what we can get away with. And the wealthier parents, they're going to hire a lawyer or an advocate, and we'll deal with that as it pops up. And, I've seen that a lot. And I've seen where the outsourcing has led to major shortages in those parapros that, these are the assistants that legally these students need and are supposed to be provided, but you can't provide who doesn't show up to work. And when you've outsourced and they have shitty pay and no benefits, no security, no stability, now you're competing with Lowe's and Walmart and McDonald's. And I mean, these are not easy jobs. These are jobs that may require you lifting, a 100-pound child. It may require you changing diapers, dealing with bodily fluids, and that's not for everybody. I mean, sometimes you're literally chasing kids, and somebody needs to do these jobs. But once you've outsourced, you have just, first of all, you've shown your priority that you place on these children. And then you're gonna have less effective services for these children, which, oh, by the way, now these parents, they're more interested in educational savings accounts or vouchers to private schools, because now they are getting shortchanged in the public school system. And you almost can't blame them for being, teased by that rhetoric, because it's playing on their real world experiences of their children. And all of us who have kids, we just want the best for our own kids. And that's what's so despicable about the austerity and neoliberal corporate reform politics that is happening inside the schools. It's not just the charter schools and vouchers from the outside. It's these assholes sabotaging from the inside. And sometimes that's more hidden and more devious and more destructive.
Yeah, like what you said about, parents, not having a lot of choices and looking at, vouchers. And that was like how the charter school Ponzi scheme was hatched in Chicago. One thing that Arnie Duncan, when he was CEO of the Chicago Public Schools, he boasted was he came up with the idea that there was a charter school cap. There's still a charter school cap in Illinois, where the state says, we can only have a certain amount. What his brilliant scheme was that he allowed for charter schools, once they get their charter approved, to open multiple campuses under the same flagship. And at first, this is as corrupt as it sounds, but then beyond that, they started different charters could have multiple charter management organizations running them. So it's not even like really, it's almost more of a franchise than it is,
right?
A network of schools. So like,
it sounds like McDonald's.
Exactly. And like McDonald's, some are shitty and some are nice. So they have this particular one, CICS, network charter schools. They opened up and in this it was named Good Counsel. It was a girls' Catholic school, and very high reputable school in the district. All their sports programs, they were considered like a very well respected Catholic school. And when they decided they were going to close down Good Counsel, the people that were thinking of opening up the CICS charter schools talked to parents. Like, they were smart. They organized parents, and they said, hey, look, we're going to open up a charter school in the same building. You're going to get a Catholic school education for free. And that organized a lot of parents around it. And that became the flagship school where, how charter schools accept a lot of philanthropy, a lot of donations. What they do is they'll shift that money to some campuses and not others. So that was the shiniest, beautiful campus, high test scores. And every time they would bring kids out to lobby for more money down in Springfield, our state capital, they would bring kids from that school and they would talk about how they're going to these esteemed colleges. And that's how they would reproduce the system over and over again. Meanwhile, there were CICS schools on the west and the south sides, which are more black and brown and poor communities, where there weren't enough desks for kids and there weren't enough books. They had subs teaching classes all year. And, it was like you get a pot of money and they shift it to certain places to enrich certain people. But at the end of the day, like, if they were to call someone out on that, they'll say, well, that's a different charter management organization. That's not us, even though they have the same goddamn logo on all the schools.
Right. Yeah, there's all these intricate schemes of plausible deniability.
Yes.
And that's one of those hidden dangers of the privatization scheme. It's because it does remove accountability. The more they can insulate the accountability between the people responsible and the actual fucking public, that seems to be the name of the game. Well, it's not us. It's those folks we hired. Well, we didn't actually do it. We subcontracted. It's that fucker for making $9 an hour. That's his fault, and they passed the buck all the way down the pyramid. But something you mentioned earlier about your mayor, Miss Lori Lightfoot, and these charter school operators, there's a lot of similarities in how they can play on woke language and how they exploit civil rights language, and at times play on and exploit what are real inequities that do exist. And they're able to kind of push those buttons in such a way to play on sympathies and to ultimately get their way of making money and achieving their agenda. But it's interesting how you see politicians like Lightfoot, and as well as these charter management groups and others that are all using these similar tactics, which gives some plausible deniability to, your Democrats who are supporting this kind of shit.
Yeah, one example I could give of that is there's a charter network in Chicago called the Noble Street Charter Schools. And this school, it was a way, they ran like a quasi-private school where the kids had to like buy these, specialized uniforms. And if the kid wore like a belt that didn't match their shoes, they would get fined $5 for the day. If their pants were the wrong color. And one of the issues too they had there was that they were very rigid about the pants being very light colored. And some girls were saying, well, on my period, I'd like to wear darker pants. And there were a few instances of girls, staining their pants. And the district refused to change their policy on, or not the district, but the school system there refused to change the policy on it. And they would do a lot of counseling out of students who were getting bad test scores by saying, well, maybe you don't want to go here. Maybe you want to go to the public school in your neighborhood, which, by the way, if a kid starts the school year out in a charter school and then later leaves to go back to their public school, the funding doesn't follow them. The funding has already gone to the coffers of the charter. So they would make a ton of, they were hoarding money by doing that, by accepting a ton of kids and then making it almost impossible, either because their discipline policies were so freakish, or the kids would just get fined out so much that they weren't allowed to like have their grades posted. So then they would keep the funding from those kids while sending them off to the public schools, where we would then have crowded classrooms and no more additional resources for those kids. And meanwhile, the charter then, it's a scheme, and it's a way of rooting out the kids that are gonna make their test scores look bad, troublemakers, and even just like, because when they were unionizing, I got a chance to meet some of the workers there. They just crush creativity out of the kids, because the curriculum is about, they have what, they some of them flatly have called an assimilationist curriculum, where the idea is they want to teach the kids how to like behave in white society, essentially.
Right.
And that includes like tucking in your shirt. Tracking the teacher with your eyes is something that's finable. Like if the teacher catches you not looking at them when they like walk around the room teaching, they can fine you $5 for that.
That's insane.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good practice for dealing with rogue fascist cops. They're getting them ready, I guess, for the neoliberal hellscape they're going to enter when they leave school.
Well, so the reason why I bring this up, though, talking about the woke thing, is that their reputation finally caught up with them. In fact, the founder of the school, it's been an open secret the guy's a creep, and that's starting to come out a little bit more. He left, on his own, retired, even though he's not retirement age. And then they hired a lot of people of color now to head up the staff. And they issued this, it wasn't an apology, but it was something that could have easily been written by Robin DiAngelo of White Fragility. It was like, well, we've practiced misogynistic and racist practices in the past, but we're owning up to them. And it's like all of that language throughout this whole statement, but nothing in there a concrete, and this is how we're going to change it. Right. And like, the one thing that they could do is just recognize the fucking union that's organizing there and let the teachers, take the wheel for a while. But no, that's not going to happen. But they're couching everything in woke language.
Yeah, God forbid we actually give up just an inch of power. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting turn of events and how they would come out and not admit to it, but sort of admit to it while playing on that, playing on those strings. The wokeness that is being exploited for all these profiteering schemes is just so evil to me. You know, I saw that, you know, in Montgomery, in our state capital, and there was a similar kind of pattern in the types of kids they would bring when they lobbied for more money, you know, these private and charter schools. And you're right, it is a way to bounce kids out, the ones that they don't want to educate. So even in states and in cities where they're called public, quote unquote, charter schools, and theoretically they have open enrollment, you're not supposed to be denied for, you know, ability or race or any other factor. But yeah, like you said, lo and behold, there's always these ways they find to conveniently not end the year with all those students they started with who did have special needs, or, you know, had English as a second language, or, you know, did have behavioral issues. Those kids always get bounced back to the public school. And we just had a comment about the sucking the creativity and individualism out of the kids. And I mean, unfortunately, we have too much of that in the public school system as it is. But a lot of these charters are like what you're talking about, that are just off the chain in terms of, you know, the rigid discipline and the scripted curriculum, and they're just fucking mean to the kids. And it's just, I don't know how I couldn't work there. I couldn't do it. I mean, even teaching inside, you know, the pretty broken or sabotage public school system, that can be alienating enough, you know, when you're on like day 13 of standardized testing in a row and you just see the life draining out of these kids. I couldn't imagine being in one of those fucked up charters.
And like you were saying, it is enticing to the parents. Like they the United,
the privatizers create the demand.
Yes. And like the United Neighborhood Organization in Chicago was a really progressive community organization for a really long time, until their leader, Danny Solis, who was once a progressive, became a corrupt alderman and got very close to Mayor Daley. And Danny Solis became the guy that had to sell Daley's like neoliberal policies then to the Southwest Side Latino communities. And they eventually started running charter schools. And their schools were just beautiful, like, you know, very futuristic looking design, and very clean. And so they would show parents that, and then parents that knew that their neighborhood school was not clean, that, you know, the kids might be getting into fights there. And, you know, there were gang problems, whereas the charter schools have no problem kicking out any student, so there's almost never a gang problem. So, you know, you can't blame parents for buying into that, because you do feel like, you know, I'm buying safety for my, or not buying, but like I'm putting my child in a safe situation. And then there is a lot of bait and switch then at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it usually doesn't work out that well, or at least as well as presented. But that's what's so insidious about it, is this sabotage from within the public schools that create the demand for something better. And you know, that can go one of two ways. That could be with the union and the community, or it can be your individualistic solution for your individual children with one of these, you know, private schools or charters or whatever it may be.
There's like an interesting like life timeline, I think, to a lot of charter teachers. A lot of them will come in and they'll drink the Kool-Aid, because when you're just out of school and you're just so excited, I'm going to be teaching, And they tell you like, well, you here at the charter school, you're special teachers.
Mm-hmm.
You're bringing, more to the kids than the public school teachers are, because we work the shit out of you and make you go to extra meetings, and your summer is
You're
shorter.
not like those lazy union teachers over
Yeah.
there.
And then for a while they'll eat it up and just be like, I'll do that. And then either a few years they just get burnt out, or they're like, okay, now I want to start a family. And they realize that you can't start a family if you're working 14-hour days for $25K a year.
Yeah.
And that's when a lot of them, a lot of them will start unions or like start organizing, which is beautiful. But then a lot of them either try to get into administration or just leave teaching entirely.
I think there's a similar vibe with Teach for America.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I want to get off on a TFA rant, but I think there's some similarities there in the type of personalities sometimes that are attracted, and like that life cycle you described.
Yeah.
Some of the best union teachers I've known, or very social justice teachers, are former TFA. But you also saw a lot of that. They did their quick tour, padded their resume. Now they're on to law school and med school, and as an intern for some congressional asshole.
Law school.
And isn't it funny how those are the guys who always be the education liaisons for all these bigwig politicians?
Mm-hmm.
It's like they all came from some bullshit charter school or Teach for America. There's never some grizzled 23-year vet that they pull out of the local neighborhood school to be their liaison.
Yeah, and that's why I'm like kind of skeptical about like when people say, well, we're going to put an educator in charge of whatever board or a district, because it's like, well, is this someone handpicked by the neoliberals, or is this someone that was elected, and supported by the communities? Because there are sketchy people who are teachers, right, who are climbers.
Well, and I think that's something that can be co-opted in the same way that race and gender, that we're describing, this kind of fake wokeness. You can do the same thing with educator. Oh, well, we have a teacher. What they won't tell you is, they taught for 2.5 years in a charter school that their daddy got, the job for them. And now they're, working for their uncle, who's the fucking congressman.
Well, the deal with Randy Weingarten was that she taught she worked for the UFT, the local in New York, as a lawyer. And then they got her a part-time job for 6 years teaching in a school, because that was like the bare minimum for her to run for union office.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that. You have the deep lore.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of shit talkers, but I do always ask for receipts.
Yeah, that always helps.
Ooh, Sal, thanks for the raid. Appreciate it. You got 25 minutes. Thank you.
Someone in our chat just said that they went to a charter school from 6th grade to 12th grade, and this conversation has helped them realize a lot of the motivations behind some of the seemingly strange policies.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ty, I'm glad you found something informative at 2 a.m. about the complexities of the American education system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we're, reached that part where a few generations of students have been through that system. And it is interesting to see how differently they look at education.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too, and I'm fascinated how that's going to play out, because I was just having this conversation with someone a few days ago about how, we have kids graduating who've never experienced education that wasn't austerity.
Yeah.
They've never known schooling where it wasn't bombarded with standardized testing. They don't really remember recess. Maybe they had it briefly, but it has changed so dramatically over the last couple decades. I guess No Child Left Behind is a good, starting point, I guess. Of course, it was developing well before then,
Uh-huh.
but you know, this past 20 years has been a real experiment on our children.
It
And
is.
if you
It
go
has
out and
been.
say that, yeah, like you mentioned earlier, people may think you're crazy or you know, a conspiracy theorist, but it's all out there.
No Child. I started teaching 2 years into No Child Left Behind, so I've only known that world. I actually remember in education school, a couple of my professors like saying, "Hey, be aware of this. This is going to change things." And that was also what led to this rumor that like hundreds of thousands of teachers were going to retire. So they're all like, "Hey, don't worry, education majors, you're going to find a job." Not all of us did.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, but anyway, like then going in there and then immediately like we were not prepared for a world where we had to sift through data in meetings and to look at looking of increasing test scores across the whole school. Like that was just something we didn't talk about. We talked about how to best teach kids in my classes, and then I took English classes and how to
Well,
like
imagine
teach kids
that.
English. And then we get there and it's like, well, now we all have to sift through our reams of data because everything has to be data driven. And our principals didn't really know what that meant. The supers didn't really know what that meant, but we all were looking at spreadsheets for some reason.
Yeah, lots of bar graphs,
Mhm.
and we must have the precious data. I'm so sick and fucking tired of that phrase, data driven.
Yeah.
And I get it. There are uses for data. I mean, I'm not like writing off data writ large in the world, but Jesus, it is so overplayed in education, and it's usually bullshit data.
Yeah.
That doesn't say much. If it says anything, it's probably a reflection of the socioeconomic background of the kids you're teaching.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's been my whole experience as an educator, and it started taking on. I graduated high school in 2007, so we were already starting to see that a little bit. Alabama's always behind. The bullshit you guys experience, we catch downhill about 15 years later.
Mm-hmm.
We're behind in many a ways.
Yeah, some
but
people
you're,
call Chicago the policy lab of the nation because
Yes.
we are one of the first cities to hit all of the newfangled contraptions. And then, not if they're successful or not, but depending on how profitable they are, then they get shipped off to other places.
That is so true. Yeah, because I've tried to follow Chicago ever since I really decided to be a teacher. Chicago has always just been that place, and you guys have always been that union. So I've tried to keep up with things over the years, and it is amazing how, I'll be reading about some asshole y'all dealt with in the 90s, and then those ideas are just now landing down our direction.
Mm-hmm.
And in Alabama, it worked a similar way in that, Huntsville was kind of that laboratory. The Chicago policies are making their way down to Huntsville, and then they spread from there throughout the rest of the state.
Mm-hmm. And some of it is like directly through those grifters like Paul Vallis. He stayed here. He just stays in places for as long as he can until he pisses people off. And he actually, I have a policy degree from Northwestern, and Paul Vallis was one of the we had to go to a certain amount of speaking events for a class, and he gave a speech right after privatizing everything in NOLA, all the schools there, where he goes over this list where he was just completely blunt, where he's just like, deprofessionalized teaching. He said that high school teachers are failed professors, and that we need to stop teaching literature and humanities, and we need to start getting kids ready for careers. And he just line after line about how we need to like make less autonomy, give less autonomy to teachers, and make us more like bureaucrats, really, just like carrying out the orders of the superintendents, and completely scripted curriculum. He actually called it teacher-proof curriculum that we need, because he wanted to have a type of curriculum that we couldn't modify and make our own.
They didn't want to risk you screwing it up.
And then he just walked around and started handing everyone his business card for his consultancy in New Orleans at the time, and that was the reason why he was there. He was there, I think, to sniff out who the hungry MPA students were who were willing to sell their soul, go down to New Orleans and make some money. I was not one of those people. One person that really did disappoint me was one of my professors was like, Kenzo, I think you should do that. That's a really good opportunity. And this professor is pretty liberal. And I'm just like, no, you don't get it at all.
Yeah, that's always heartbreaking when someone you respect falls for a grifter.
Yeah. And you know what? She was right. If that was how I viewed the world and it was about making money and gaining influence, that would have been a great opportunity. But that would have been like the most evil thing I could possibly do in life. Would have been to make that choice.
Right. You know, how much is your soul worth?
Yeah.
And some people don't put much of a price on it, honestly.
Oh yeah, I mean, like it would be a good
people
life.
Settle for a little.
But it wouldn't be like I'd go down there and make millions. I would just get like probably maybe a decent bureaucratic job, and one where I'd have to do political work, you know, after work hours, and you know that is a shitty life being a bootlicker.
Yeah, it is, and yet so many return over and over to lick that boot.
They just love the taste of leather.
There were a couple of things you mentioned I wanted to follow up on. First of all, and this is, you know, way too deep and complex issue to get into right now, but you know, this trend of treating the public schools as more or less like an extension of the training programs of local industry. And I think there is, in terms, you talked about the plan. I think that's part of the plan is seeing, you know, particularly at the high school level, as vocational training to get you at the Toyota plant, or you know, whatever the local industry is in your county or region. And it's not that we don't want our students to have jobs, but at a certain point it starts to look like you're just outsourcing employee training to the public tax dollars. But the other thing that is really a theme throughout your conversation and what I've shared as well is how important local politics is. Most people can get on Twitter and bitch about Joe Biden and Donald Trump, and you know, more power to you, they suck. Yeah. But chances are you've got a school board member, a city council member, a mayor who's also an asshole and is also a grifter. And you'd be surprised at how much more effective you can be at that local level.
Yeah, I think, you know, the whole like sniping at Biden or even AOC on Twitter, I think a lot of that comes from a feeling of just hopelessness and not feeling like we don't have a lot of power in our own lives. So like we can go on social media and like, you know, AOC or Biden aren't going to respond, but other people will. And then you can have a back and forth on it, but there's no challenging of power in that.
There's no theory of change to shit posting.
Yeah, and that's why like I love shit posting, but like I maintain that is shit posting I'm doing.
Right.
I'm not really going to change minds with like a rage comic meme about Nancy Pelosi.
Right. And I don't know if you caught this, but Ben Burgess was on earlier, and in our conversation, something that we kind of touched on was this sense of powerlessness, and how a lot of people are viewing politics as like individual virtue, which may be a little bit of a digression of shit posting, but I think there is some connection there in that, you know, because people feel powerless and feel like, rightfully so, that electoral politics really hasn't accomplished much positive in the last 4 or 5 decades. You know, people just sort of resort to looking at folks individually. Are they using the right language? Are they good people? Or are they evil people? What are they posting about? And what can I post about them? And that's not really politics.
No.
That's just entertainment.
Yeah, determining who's good and who's bad. as humans, like who's going to heaven and who's going to hell,
Yeah, someone put that in
doesn't
our
change
chat
it.
earlier. Who's going to heaven? Who's going to hell?
Mhm.
As politics. I think that's a great way to put it.
And it doesn't move anyone forward. Like AOC, for example, like, a few weeks ago, well, she's constantly being barraged by leftist people about not acting fast enough or not doing the force the vote thing and everything. But then just a few days ago, she and Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, Ayanna Pressley, they spoke out passionately for Israel, for Palestine, something that I've never seen on the floor of Congress before, like very loudly and passionately about Palestine and about the Palestinians. So to say that like they have no value because maybe they didn't make this one litmus test, is so narrow-minded, because they could be, doing good in other places, and that's, this is one place where I've never seen this kind of advocacy.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier with Max, and something that I shared, and you probably would echo, is that I can't remember this happening in my lifetime where, yeah, people were willing to go on the floor of Congress, people are willing to go on mainstream media and talk about Palestinians as our fellow human beings who deserve dignity. And somehow that's such a controversial thing to believe, that they're just like us. They're just regular people who want to live a good life like anybody else. But yeah, I mean, this is just a pretty recent development, that there's an acknowledgement among mainstream politicians and mainstream media. And I'm hopeful that represents a real change in this issue. Not that just changing the discourse or changing opinion polls on the issue, fixes the material realities on the ground, but it is nice to actually see people willing to speak publicly on behalf of Palestinians, and see a mainstream group like Human Rights Watch actually use the word apartheid. That is something.
It is something, and we need to use that momentum in this moment. Right. And I think when it comes to some people during the first the vote thing, what they learned out of it was that they can't depend on politicians to be their saviors, and I think that's a good lesson. But then I think
is a good lesson.
To leave it at that, though, but to leave it at that and say force the vote then becomes the litmus test is so misguided. Not just a litmus test for politicians, but litmus test for allies and comrades, because people will fight with each other over it, and there's no reason to. But if you've come to that realization that you can't trust the Democrats, then go ahead and read The Democrats: A Critical History by Lance Saifa. A great book that explains exactly why they're Capital's second favorite political party. And the other one I recommend is No One Left to Lie To, which is a Christopher Hitchens book about the Clinton family. And reading those books, you understand how the Democratic Party works, and then take that analysis and see what you can do with that, to get other people on your side to understand that you can't trust the Democrats. But right. To yell at potential allies because of one tactic you disagreed with doesn't move anyone forward.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I totally hope some people did learn that lesson, that you can't just vote in an AOC and everything's going to be okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, if it just stops there, we didn't really accomplish anything. And, I am not nearly on social media as much as my comrades on the show. And I guess now that I'm trying to help out with this media project, maybe I'm going to have to be a little bit more. But I've intentionally kind of stayed away from a lot of that online lefty drama.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how I saw that force the vote debate that was blowing up on Twitter and elsewhere. Yeah, when you're burning bridges with people who should be your comrades and allies because you disagree on a particular tactic, with a particular Congress, I mean, really, this take a step back and look at our real values and a broader strategy for change.
Yeah, everyone who was a part of that debate agreed on health, Medicare for all. We disagreed on how to get there, and frankly, like the plan was one that was like a wing and a prayer. Like it didn't, it did not have the substance to actually work. And to be involved in politics, you just have to have a tougher skin about that stuff. Like you're gonna come up with ideas that are awesome, that might even be the best ideas ever, and if you can't get them done politically, you just have to lick your wounds, and then how am I going to get this to work in another way? How the next time this comes around, this is such a good idea, we'll figure out how to make it work. But to harp on losing a political fight, you're not going to last long in trying to make change.
That is so true. If you're not prepared to lose and then try to learn from the loss and then probably lose some more, then maybe left-wing politics is not your thing.
Yeah, because we lose a lot.
And I know that's a dangerous thing because people can be prone to disengage.
Yeah.
No one likes to lose all the time. But, I think that's where the relationships built on solidarity, that's where those come into play. Because you are going to lose. But when you still have your brothers and sisters that have your back and you have theirs, that makes it a little bit easier to deal with the losses. Well, I guess I should do a donation update.
Yes. Where are we at?
We were a little bit over 52,000 when we started. Okay, it looks like we've gotten a few $100 come in.
Nice.
Since we started streaming with Kenzo, so I think that's awesome. Those of you who are still awake, we had a comment from Japan, so I'm assuming daytime there. Probably a much more reasonable hour to be watching this. So welcome, Japan. Welcome to all of our brothers and sisters and comrades across the world. We appreciate your support of these 1,100 miners on strike. They have been on the picket line since April 1st, and every dollar you can contribute goes a long way to support these people and their families as they try to stay strong and get the fair contract they deserve. And Kenzo, I really appreciate this opportunity to just shoot the shit with you about education.
Yeah, this was fun.
This is my wheelhouse. So anytime education stuff comes up, that's usually when Jacob and David start kind of looking at me. So it's been an honor for me, honestly, to talk to you and kind of glean some wisdom.
Oh, anytime
from you. So, Kenzo, tell us, what do you have working on right now? I know you have a lot of projects you're always working on. It seems like you're an incredibly busy man. So,
yeah. Well, the main thing,
what you're working on right now, what kind of podcasts you have out, and what you're up to.
Okay, so I do the Kenzo Shibata Show. That's my podcast. My recent interview was with my rabbi, Brant Rosen, where we talked about Gaza. He's a BDS organizer and Palestine solidarity activist. So we had a long conversation about Jewish identity and where Zionism and anti-Zionism fit in there. And he shared it with a lot of people in the congregation, and they really enjoyed that. That one is going to be coming out on Monday. And on the previous one I did to that was with Dr. Christopher Schneider. He's an expert on the surveillance state, and we did an episode on the failure of police body cams. So yeah, for $5 a month, you can get those episodes. But then here over on Twitch and on YouTube, where we are now, every Sunday I do Meet the Left. Which is we do a panel of 3 different leftist organizers, media folks, writers, critics, and yeah, we just hash out the week's issues. Jake's been on, David's been on, and yeah, we have a lot of fun. That's Sundays at 6 p.m. on twitch.tv/class time.
Awesome. So if you are listening to the Valley Labor Report, you're not familiar with Kenzo, hopefully you are now, and you will give him a follow, listen to his stuff.
Appreciate that.
He is a great educator and unionist in Chicago, and we really appreciate all he's doing there and all he's done to, support this program down here in Alabama. It means a lot, really.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Jacob has returned from slumber.
Jacob, feeling refreshed?
And I actually have to go put wood in the smoker so I don't ruin David's butts he's been working so hard on. So, Kenzo, it was great to chat with you. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, anytime. All right, have a good night, y'all.
All right. Have a good night,
Take
Kenzo.
care.